Burke Ramsay, the elder brother of the slain child beauty queen JonBenet Ramsey, has now come up after almost 30 years of quiet. One of the most eerie unsolved murders in American history is the terrible death of his sister in 1996, which shocked the whole globe. The case of JonBenet, who was brutally killed when she was 6 years old in the basement of her Colorado home, has been beset by public mistrust, media hysteria, and investigation errors. Burke stayed out of the public eye for years, staying quiet in the face of circulating rumors and charges. 28 years later, he's now speaking up, giving his side of the story in a moving and illuminating interview that has the potential to change public opinion and throw fresh light on a case that will never go away. JonBenet Ramsey case. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey remains one of the most chilling and perplexing criminal cases in American history. On December 26, 1996, the 6-year-old child beauty queen was found dead in the basement of her family's Boulder, Colorado home, just hours after her mother, Patsy Ramsey, reported her missing and claimed to have discovered a ransom note demanding $118,000. The shocking murder, the bizarre ransom letter, and the unsettling crime scene immediately gripped the nation. The case dominated headlines, fueled intense media scrutiny, and sparked widespread speculation about who could have committed such a brutal act. Plagued by missteps. From the very beginning, the investigation was plagued by missteps, a contaminated crime scene, mishandled evidence, and a media frenzy that vilified the Ramsey family. Despite decades of inquiry, countless theories, and a DNA profile that ruled out the family, JonBenet's killer has never been found. The case sparked fierce debate among law enforcement, journalists, and the public, turning a grieving family into tabloid targets. Nearly 3 decades later, questions still linger and hope for justice endures. With new advancements in DNA technology and renewed efforts by the Ramsey family, many believe the truth may finally be within reach. But will it ever be found? The tragic death. The world was rocked by the terrible death of 6-year-old beauty queen JonBenet Ramsey 28 years ago. Her murder, which was discovered in her family's cellar, is still one of the most eerie and unresolved cases in American history. Burke Ramsey, her brother, who was just 9 years old at the time, hasn't spoken out until now. Burke has finally come out after decades of secrecy and conjecture, and what he says is shocking everyone. What caused him to wait so long? And would what he said ultimately reveal the reason for JonBenet's demise? Join us as we uncover the actual cause of the beloved child star's demise. Holiday season turned into a nightmare. When the Ramsey family's holiday season devolved into a nightmare in December 1996, the events that followed set the stage for a tragedy. JonBenet Ramsey's life was cruelly cut short when she was found dead in the basement of her Boulder, Colorado home on December 26th. After examination, it was discovered that she had a broken skull and a garrote, a strangling instrument, implanted in her neck. The peculiar aspect was the ransom letter that was left behind, claiming that she had been abducted and requesting $118,000 to return her, even though her body had been in the house the whole time. Suspicion on the family. A serious issue arose when her father, John Ramsey, shockingly found her death in the basement, casting suspicion on the family. There was no evidence of forced entry, and the strange ransom message, which demanded $118,000, matching a bonus given to John Ramsey, sparked considerable conjecture. The Ramseys were singled out in their own house by the media because the murder scene was not adequately guarded. However, the Ramseys were exonerated of any participation in 2006 due to substantial DNA evidence, when JonBenet's clothes were found to contain genetic material from an unidentified man. The focus of the investigation shifted to the possibility of an intruder. This did not identify a suspect, but it did exonerate the parents. Leaving the world stunned. Burke Ramsey, the brother of JonBenet Ramsey, gained notoriety 28 years later when he abruptly broke his silence, shocking everyone. Over the years, he had declined to appear in any films or interviews. He didn't even take part in the recent Netflix documentary series that examined the JonBenet Ramsey case. He shockingly agreed to a 3-part interview on Dr. Phil, which was his first time speaking in public since the tragedy. After nearly 30 years of silence, he was asked why he had finally chosen to speak out. He said, "If the story is going to be told, I want to tell it. I don't want people talking about me. I would rather tell my own story." A wide range of questions. Burke answered a variety of questions from Dr. Phil regarding the incident, providing insight into the startling events that unfolded at that moment. Not, he said when asked whether he had used a flashlight or bat in connection with the event, adding that he had remained in bed the whole time and at first believed his sister was only hiding when she was reported missing. He also described his police interrogations. As one would anticipate from a 9-year-old, Burke seemed anxious and perplexed throughout the interviews. He sometimes even grinned during these situations, which the police took to be an admission of guilt. He was just nervous. The heartbreaking moment. Dr. Phil probed deeply throughout the conversation. He and Burke went over the 911 call recordings, spoke about why Burke stayed in bed while his family and the police were downstairs, and relived the devastating moment Burke learned his sister was dead rather than just hiding. He said that all it took to start crying was for his father to tell him she's in heaven. Additionally, a newly released interrogation tape from the Dr. Phil program showed Burke's terrified response. He now has the self-assurance to openly address the myths and ideas that have plagued him for decades as an adult. 3 long-standing theories. 3 long-standing ideas were expanded upon by the publication of this interview: the Ramsays, Burke, and an invader. Burke consented to the interview with the sole intention of correcting the record, although he acknowledged having seen several internet ideas and rumors that blamed him. However, why did the police believe that the Ramsays might have harmed their little daughter so severely? Early on, the most widely accepted belief about the death of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was that the Ramsays were responsible for her strangulation in the basement of her family's Colorado house. The residence was a chaotic crime scene, with police, friends, and relatives roaming about freely and contaminating necessary evidence. The ransom note. John Ramsay discovered his daughter's corpse a few hours after he called the police. Nevertheless, the family was suspected for several reasons. JonBenet's mother, Patsy Ramsey, discovered a 2.5-page ransom letter demanding $118,000, which was uncannily similar to John's Christmas bonus, just before filing a missing persons report. On the paper retrieved from inside the residence, the letter was scrawled. The fact that there was no indications of forced entry was even more concerning. It seemed that the ransom letter had come from inside the house. At that point, mistrust of the family started to develop. Investigators developed other concerning information. The garrote that was used to strangle JonBenet was made from a paintbrush handle that was found inside the home. More questions were raised when Patsy's handwriting test results on the message were unclear. Lack of footprints and forced entry. Meanwhile, authorities suspected that the perpetrator was already acquainted with or had been inside the house, as there were no signs of forced entry or footprints in the snow. The situation was made worse when JonBenet's father found her corpse. She was taken upstairs by John Ramsay, who unintentionally disturbed the murder scene and perhaps destroyed necessary forensic evidence, a move that several specialists subsequently denounced as a disastrous mistake. Within hours of the tragedy, the Ramsays restricted police access to the home and engaged powerful attorneys and public relations experts. They came across as defensive and evasive because they refused to cooperate fully with the authorities, suggesting that they were concealing something. Focusing on Ramsay as the main suspect. Despite their initial sympathy, the police eventually turned their attention to the Ramsays as the primary suspects. Due to the family's defensive demeanor and growing circumstantial evidence, detectives believed their suspicions were well-founded. The inquiry focused on the home rather than exploring other potential possibilities. However, establishing this idea was not simple. For starters, there was no hard proof that the Ramsays had killed JonBenet. Furthermore, the family had no apparent reason for killing their cherished daughter, which added to the situation's complexity and emotional intensity. Investigators would eventually uncover evidence that exonerated the parents. However, did you know that Burke Ramsey, who was 9 years old at the time, was one of the first suspects? The earliest suspect. During the early investigation process, Burke Ramsey was under a lot of heat. He was the subject of many true crime enthusiasts. Speculation spread as to how a 9-year-old might have committed the crime. The parents maintained a low profile during the catastrophic period, but that did not stop the whispers and hypotheses revolving around them. They appeared in many interviews, not sharing their sorrows but defending themselves, and urging the police and public to look into alternative possibilities. Burke Ramsey avoided the spotlight, who was still a kid then. Years passed and the fog cleared. Now there was new evidence, not only proving their innocence, but showing how the entire scene was a mislead. Clearing the family's name. Following additional DNA testing that showed foreign male genetic material on JonBenet's clothing, DNA that did not match any family member, the Boulder District Attorney formally exonerated the entire Ramsey family in 2008, including Burke and the late Patsy Ramsey. Subsequently, District Attorney Mary Lacey verified the Ramseys' exoneration and officially apologized to them for the public concern that had been caused. Burke had testified before a grand jury in 1999 and had been examined by investigators at least 3 times, according to court documents. He was never regarded as a suspect, according to officials. Tests of his handwriting and DNA revealed that they did not match any evidence discovered at the crime scene. The Burke did it argument was rekindled in 2016 by a CBS documentary series, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, which implied that the ransom letter was created as a cover-up after a childhood mishap turned deadly. Burke responded by bringing a slander action for $750 million, which was discreetly resolved in 2019. The authorities mishandled the case. Burke made his lone public appearance on Dr. Phil just before the CBS series premiered, and he categorically denied any role in his sister's death. He also shared the idea that JonBenet was murdered by an intruder who may have been a member of her pageant circle. Burke was not afraid to voice his disapproval of the police inquiry, however. He believes that the authorities' initial errors delayed justice and that they mishandled the case from the outset. What particular issues did the investigation have? The Boulder Police Department handled the scene of the gruesome murder of 6-year-old JonBenet with a surprising lack of urgency. The residence was not sufficiently guarded, even though a ransom letter was found, suggesting a possibly dangerous abduction. Contaminating the crime scene. Instead, friends, relatives, and even unnecessary police officers were able to roam around the home, contaminating the scene of the murder. Before it could be meticulously gathered, vital evidence, including fingerprints, footprints, and maybe DNA, was corrupted. The underground wine cellar where JonBenet's death was found was one of the essential locations of the property that the police neglected to search thoroughly. By misunderstanding the duties of law enforcement and the victim's relatives, the lone investigator on the scene even instructed John Ramsay to start investigating the home himself. John was the one who eventually found the corpse of his daughter. He brought her upstairs in tears and terror, a natural human response to being a bereaved parent. However, by removing the duct tape from her lips and transferring the corpse before any forensic evidence could be obtained, he disrupted the crime scene. The first response was disastrous. Mark Beckner, the retired chief of police in Boulder, eventually acknowledged that the first approach was terrible. He pointed out that the family wasn't separated, the situation wasn't under control, and it wasn't until 5 months later that their official statements were even obtained. As he saw it, it was a perfect storm, a confluence of societal forces that led to inaction and careless management, holiday personnel shortages, and misunderstandings about appropriate practices. Prominent speakers, including retired murder investigator Joe Kenda and FBI agent Ron Walker, echoed similar criticism. Walker described the mismanagement as catastrophic, claiming that appropriate evidence collecting had been thwarted by the department's attitude and ineffective leadership. Kenda was even more direct, referring to the case as destroyed and asserting that it had been damaged irrevocably from the start. Compromising the forensic examination. Official records further validated the ineptitude. According to Lieutenant Linda Arndt's report, JonBenet's corpse was moved many times before any preservation measures were implemented, sometimes at her father's request, jeopardizing the chance of a controlled forensic investigation. To make matters worse, a barrage of media attention caused the case to escalate rapidly. False reports proliferated like wildfire, exposing important information. For instance, erroneous accounts said that Patsy Ramsay had declined to provide JonBenet's DNA or disclose her whereabouts. Long before there was any proof to support these unfounded stories, the public's perception of the family was one of guilt, as they were described as evasive and reluctant. Trial by television. With the Ramsay family, particularly Patsy, at the heart of the controversy, the media's coverage of JonBenet Ramsey's death quickly changed from journalism to a relentless trial by television. Tabloids and cable news networks jumped on the bandwagon, often sacrificing factual accuracy in favor of fanciful hypotheses aimed at increasing viewership. The distinction between entertainment and justice was blurred by shows like Geraldo Rivera's, which featured a manufactured fake trial that depicted the Ramsays as guilty without any supporting evidence. The family was ridiculed by tabloids, who claimed that Patsy had coerced JonBenet into participating in beauty pageants, and even that John had engaged in inappropriate behavior. These accusations were ultimately shown to be untrue. Dragged into the media maelstrom. Burke Ramsay was drawn into the media frenzy even at the age of 9. During interviews and interrogations, every action and response he made was scrutinized and condemned incessantly. His decision to keep quiet for 28 years is hardly surprising. Additionally, clinical mistakes served as fuel for sensationalism in the media. Even though none of the facts showed culpability, beyond a reasonable doubt, details such as the ransom letter matching John's bonus or the lack of forceful entry were often brought up and used as incriminating evidence. Ethics in the media were criticized more generally. Veteran journalist Michael Tracy denounced the coverage as a media assassination and a public lynching, denouncing the methods that demonized a whole family via rumors, half-truths that were leaked, and careless reporting. Who is the killer? After the DNA evidence was made public, all the speculation and scrutiny eventually subsided. However, who is the murderer if such is the case? All Ramsays were definitively ruled out after forensic experts took a mixed male DNA profile from JonBenet's undergarments in December 2003. The National DNA Database, CODIS, received the profile, but it did not match anybody. By 2016, however, more thorough testing had revealed that the original male DNA was a combination of DNA from many different individuals. Some of these DNA patterns were discovered on her ligature materials and underwear, among other locations, indicating that a stranger, rather than a relative, was most likely involved. This pivotal event ultimately led to suspicion shifting away from the family. However, it carried with it another issue. Killer's identity remained a mystery to the authorities. John Ramsay remains puzzled. Since then, John Ramsay has disclosed that important evidence, including the garrote used to strangle his daughter, were submitted for testing in early 1997 but were never examined. Given the subsequent advancements in DNA technology, he remains perplexed as to why these artifacts were never subjected to a comprehensive analysis. Despite persistent demands from the Ramsay family, the Boulder Police Department has not authorized further testing on the available DNA samples since 2018. They contend that justice for JonBenet relies on using all available tools and that more accurate findings are achievable with today's sophisticated techniques. The case's stagnation. John Andrew Ramsay, JonBenet's elder half-brother, has also voiced his disapproval of the case's inaction. He said emphatically in a recent interview, "This case can be solved. He feels that the community has turned against his family to some degree and that the authorities aren't doing enough. It's wrong what happened to JonBenet, my family, and the community as a whole," he said. "They were responsible for the death of this 6-year-old child. Ultimately, they're responsible for identifying the murderer, and they're capable of doing so." John Andrew says he's still driven to discover his younger sister's murderer and keeps urging detectives to do better for JonBenet's sake. The narrative as an unsolved homicide. I believe people must realize that this problem is solvable. There is a narrative that says we should simply accept the reality that this is an unsolved killing. That isn't accurate. He also recalled the moment he learned about JonBenet's death. If we use the evidence and follow the facts, we'll find this killer. He was getting ready to go see his father's family after spending the holidays in Atlanta with his mother and sister. Then he got the instruction, call home just before the flight. He never anticipated and has never forgotten the startling phone call that followed. He spoke openly about his sister. John Andrew Ramsey has spoken candidly about his sister, JonBenet, and the effect her passing had on the family, in contrast to Burke, who has seldom made public appearances. JonBenet was the kid who kept the conversation at dinner table going, he once said in 2020. She would ask everyone how their day was going and what they had done. You know, John Andrews spoke about the hardships in his family long before the tragedy, adding, "She was just an energetic and fun kid." They had previously experienced the devastating death of JonBenet's elder half-sister, Beth, in a vehicle accident, and their mother, Patsy, had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Feelings were already unfiltered. Nobody anticipated that such destruction would occur again. The world would turn against them. But John Andrew had no idea that the world would turn against them so quickly, accusing them of killing their youngest daughter. An already intolerable situation was exacerbated by the media, which fueled the fires of rumors and speculation. After over 10 years of self-defense, John and Patsy Ramsey were not publicly and formally exonerated until fresh DNA evidence surfaced. John Andrew has said, "We lost our sister and our daughter, a family member. We were the victims. And the same individuals who were blaming us believed they would step in to defend and assist us. We were ordinary folks. Then, without warning, our whole world was upended." The family never stopped fighting. The Ramsey family has never given up despite the difficulties and ongoing suffering. The lawsuit is still pending over 30 years after JonBenet was murdered in 1996. John Ramsey, her father, never stops fighting for justice. When he met with Boulder's new police chief, Stephen Redfern, in January 2025, he voiced fresh hope for long-awaited progress after feeling stonewalled for years. Redfern's leadership and transparency pleased him. John and Patsy Ramsey were featured in previously unpublished interview recordings from 1998 that have just been made public. These recordings demonstrated that prosecutors were more interested in identifying discrepancies in the couple's statements than in seeking additional hints or suspects. The parents' exclusive emphasis on the investigation likely resulted in numerous lost opportunities and evidence that was overlooked. Items never undergone DNA testing. John Ramsey claims that important pieces of evidence, like the blanket JonBenet was discovered wrapped in, the ransom letter, and the handmade garrote, have never been subjected to contemporary DNA testing. According to him, the Boulder Police Department has opposed the use of cutting-edge methods like genetic genealogy, which have been used to crack several cold cases, including the notorious Golden State Killer. Ramsey has taken his case outside the police department to make progress. He's pressed for new testing and contemporary investigation techniques in discussions with politicians, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials. Colorado Cold Case Review. The Boulder Police Department joined forces with the Colorado Cold Case Review team in November 2022 in what many had believed was a case that would never go ahead. The team has now digitized thousands of tips and interview transcripts, inventoried over 25,500 pieces of evidence, and developed a searchable database. All valid leads, including DNA testing, are being investigated. Chief Redfern publicly said, pledging continued dedication. John Ramsey remains unsatisfied despite his attempts. Believing that new DNA testing may identify JonBenet's murderer, he has petitioned the governor of Colorado to step in and disclose evidence to independent laboratories. The family continues to push for justice. These untested products were further highlighted in the latest Netflix documentary series, which brought the matter back into the public eye. The Ramsey boys are trying to create happy lives for themselves as their family fights for justice. Burke Ramsey, a 37-year-old software engineer who earned a degree in computer technology from Purdue University, leads a peaceful existence in Michigan. He's consistently shunned the media, both before and during his appearance on Dr. Phil. Additionally, he rejected being included in Netflix's 2024 documentary series, citing internet rumors and past poor media treatment. Defending his parents. John Andrew Ramsey, JonBenet's elder half-sister, who is now in his 50s, did make an appearance in the recently released Netflix series. There, he criticized the Boulder Police Department's investigation while simultaneously defending his father, John, and stepmother, Patsy. John Andrew has been a long-time outspoken and resolute supporter of his sister's cause. Many believed that the family would finally be at peace when DNA evidence in 2008 formally exonerated John and Patsy Ramsey of any culpability. However, the murderer has not yet been found. Patsy tragically died in July 2006, 2 years before they were exonerated and just 10 years after JonBenet's death. John Ramsey, 67, remarried in 2021, 15 years later. In Charlevoix, Michigan, he married Jeanne Rousseau, a fashion designer from Las Vegas. Born and raised in East Africa, Jan has supported John and feels he's innocent. She has 2 grown kids of her own. They live together as a blended family in Michigan and occasionally in Utah. Will their family ever track down JonBenet's murderer, in your opinion? Or has too much time and harm gone for justice to be done properly? If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon